Okay, and without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, and that's Don N. from LA.
My name is Don, alcoholic. It's good to be in an AA meeting, full of prime rib. I told him, yeah, I like fish, and then I looked at the menu and went to prime rib. I don't know if I've been able to explain that to him yet. I got him. I'm pleased that Al asked me to share with you. I'm one of those who have managed to stay sober long enough to realize that my sobriety is fragile and that it's something I can lose real easy. Not as easy as I used to, but easy. And I've stayed sober long enough to know that these physical actions of getting from one place to another and keeping my word or keeping a commitment oftentimes is much more important than some spiritual innuendo I'm going to read out of the big book or hear from somebody else at any given moment. It seems to me that having to have to do something has been more important in my sobriety than what I can create up here. Because I'm very good at that. I'm like any alcoholic who has had to make an excuse in his lifetime. We become con artists. They cause us to do that. I think it's not our fault. They ask those terrible questions like, why did you do that? And there is no answer to that. I have never found one. My son recently in trouble in the Navy, and all I could think of as I was driving in, going into Treasure Island to see him in the brig, all I could keep saying in my head was, now don't ask him why he did it. Don't do that. Just whatever you do, don't ask him why he did that. In order to stop myself from doing it, I looked at him and I said, son, I'm not going to ask you why you did it. Just begging for an answer, give me some reason. I'm an alcoholic, and tonight at dinner, lovely dinner. Haven't seen Al in a while, and it was nice to be with he and his wife, and the company was good, and the food came, and I grabbed my cup of butter and put it in my baked potato, and you'd think that's normal, wouldn't you? But I take things for granted. That cup of butter turned out to be horseradish, and being a true alcoholic, I ate about 4 bites before I decided to cop out to it. And then being more true to my disease, I found out I liked it, and I ate all of it. And that's the story of my drinking years. That's the story of my drinking years. I put a lot of chemicals in me that were not meant to be drank, and once they got in there and they worked, I decided I liked it, and it was all right. If you're new here tonight, and whether you want to be or not, I'm one of those who doesn't believe that you can force AA down somebody's throat, because it didn't for myself, and that's all I can base anything I tell you on is my own experiences, my own opinion. And I read and hear articles regularly about bring them to us, we can help them even if they don't want help. And I'm sorry. If you stay there long enough, the law of averages will come out and make you a truth out of that. It takes the law of average. I didn't know what an alcoholic was. I didn't really formulate an opinion. I assumed that they were Skid Row. I assumed that they were winos who sit around with their lapels soaked, their pants wet, or whatever else might be familiar to somebody's idea of what an alcoholic was. I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous somewhere around 1957. And I was there for no reason to do with alcoholism. I had, through a series of bad breaks, I had been confined to a prison here in California. And laying around on the yard one afternoon, I seen some legs that went by, didn't have hair on them. That's a program of attraction. And I asked somebody, what is that? And they said, that's an AA meeting. I said, how do you go to it? And they said, well, you just go. And I went over there and I heard people get up here and they talked about things that I certainly didn't identify with. I was not quite 21 years old. I'd spent around, 7, 8 years locked up already. I had learned already how to be a man. A man is someone who attacks what scares him, and he attacks it quick for effect. And when you're a skinny man, you got to really add something to it. I call it insanity, and so did you when it showed up. And that was what being a man was. And being institutionalized at a very young age, I knew already you don't tell anybody anything. You don't talk. And you certainly don't let expressions on your face. You don't ever smile. And avoid the eyes at all costs. Because if people looked in my eyes, they're going to see something that I had covered a long time. Fear. I'd been born scared. I was born and raised in Bakersfield. That'll kind of account for this, whatever accent you might hear. I've never known myself. I call it Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma. Whoever transplanted, that's where I got it from. And I was raised poor, and it didn't matter. Wasn't important. And I was removed from my home at 9 years of age and put in a county facility. My brother was put there because we ran out of a home to live in. It was right after the war. I'm 51 years old. That'll save the mathematicians. And it was right after the war, and they wanted the house that we lived in for their son who was coming home. And so they put him out there for that reason, and then they put me there with him because I was having some difficulties. At 7, I had a nervous breakdown, which doesn't suggest a normal home. Even my son at 7 didn't have he had close to a nervous breakdown. I'd already been sober 3 years, and it took me a little while to learn some things in AA. And at 9, I was already a thief. Because in my neighborhood, they liked to fight a lot, and I was awful skinny. I was very undernourished. I had a chest that kind of went in instead of out, and knobs on here they called elbows, and just looked pitiful. Very pretty. I was had a very smooth, childish face. That was to become a terror. That was to become one of my handicaps that I would pray for. God, please give me a scar so they'll quit looking at me that way. They get confused. Must be an old military man here too. They get confused in those institutions as to what you are. And when you're confused yourself, it creates a big problem. I knew what John Wayne considered being a man. That was obvious. He never hit women, and I didn't either. Until I started getting around them. But I hadn't wanted to. They made me. It's their fault. And Bakersfield, there wasn't much to do. Everybody run around and play. They'd go outside and at 7, 8 years of age and play cowboys and Indians, and they'd have me tied to a tree as an Indian, going to burn me there, and do rotten things to me. And I go down to the local market and shoplift half of the groceries and come back up in the neighborhood and share with everybody. I was very generous. Fear will make you generous. And by God, they'd untie me. So I knew it'd work. I got into that home, and I suppose at that time, I was reading a friend of mine's biography. He became successful out of that area. And in there, they said about him that he was just kind of a nuisance, that he really wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't really. He ended up in San Quentin one time, and even that was a fluke. He was in the middle of a good drunk, And he went to the back of a bar, and it was dark. And you know, a person on a good drunk doesn't always know what dark is. You don't know if the sun's just getting ready to come up. You're not always sure if it's just gone down. And apparently he was confused in that area, and so he took a crowbar to bang in the back door of this bar that he was going to burglarize. The only trouble was it was about 6 in the evening. And apparently they heard him knocking. And they called that as harmless, and I believe it was. I don't believe the man was there to do anybody any great harm other than himself. And he was to get arrested later for another crime and went to a state prison for it. Well, I kind of had that same thing. I would get into things that were, I wasn't meaning anybody any harm. I started drinking when I was 12, 13 years old, and when you're poor, there's, you know, you either work or you steal to get alcohol. And it seemed to be important to party, and it seemed like when the weekends would come, in order to have that protective custody around me, you know, run with the big guys so I wouldn't have to get whipped on too much, I would go steal the booze. And we'd run out of booze, so I'd have to steal money, and I would take a burglary, and then they would lock me up for that. And so a series of events began to take place that were to become about the next 20-odd years of my life. Just as boring. I mean, the acts were not boring. I'll not lie about that. I found a great deal of satisfaction in them in later years. But in the beginning, I was a nuisance. And they'd ask those questions. Why are you doing that? And I never had an answer. I never knew what answer to give. I'd try to figure out what they wanted to hear, like most of us have done, and give them that answer. And nobody walked up to me and said, well, my girlfriend one time told me when I was about 15 that I seemed to have a drinking problem. I've got another girlfriend. That's logical. And I'd get into reform school, and there would always be some report on there that I'd got arrested. It was either burglarizing a beer warehouse or a market and having taken out cases and cases of beer. And you get out on the Kern River and get to partying, and who keeps count? The only thing you know, you kind of want to stay away from Carol, because when he starts to get drunk, he likes to fight. And there's a couple others around there that they tend to like to fight. And so if you back off far enough, you can let them fight and watch them, and it's a lot of fun. And then once in a while, your bad luck comes by, and then it's your turn to fight, and you got to act like you're not afraid. And that's me. That was me. And I'd go into that as though I had all the courage in the world, and I never had it. I was scared to death. And probably wouldn't have seemed important to anybody if I could have told them about it in those days. Maybe everybody felt that way. I don't know. They were all poor country boys, and their dads worked in them oil fields, and they lived a hard life, and they had very brief direction. You know, do it or take a whipping. And alcohol was beautiful. Alcohol, my sponsor, my first sponsor I had up until 2 years ago, he moved to New York. He talked about getting drunk the first time, and he's a big old ex-football player, and he said he was skinny and raw-boned, didn't know how to dance, and was at his house, and they had this big family reunion, and they passed booze around, and he and his cousin got into the booze, and he walked out, and he said his pimples just fell off. You know, he said he had all these terrible pimples, and they just fell off, and he said his arms got fat, and he went out there and danced with every girl in the room. And he said that's what alcohol did for him. And I thought about that a long time, and I don't ever recall alcohol working quite that way for me, but in its own way it did. I would spend 30 minutes at the Rainbow Garden sitting over there on the bench watching everybody dance. They're over against the wall, and they're all dancing and having fun. I'd spot her. It wouldn't matter who she was. I'd get her spotted, and I'd know that if I can just put the right words together, I'll be able to get her and go dance, and the guys will all be talking about old Nuke. You know, he's God, look at him, got that pretty one over there. And I'd study it, and every time I'd start over there, I'd look at myself, and I'd feel them bones and see them buck teeth, and that chest is not working the right direction, and I wasn't very impressed with me, and I knew she wouldn't be, and I was just going to get rejected again. And I'd go out to the car, and I'd get a little of the booze that we had there for after the dance, and I'd get mine down first. And I'd walk back in there and I'd take a look at her and I'd think, screw her. I don't need her anyway. And might even dance anyway, you know. Wouldn't be anybody there, but I'd be having a good time. So alcohol did that for me. My harmful, playful ways became more serious as you get older. I don't know. You make bad judgments. Walking into Alcoholics Anonymous and listening to pitches and trying to identify with what I was hearing, trying to identify with people who went to college and got careers and began developing their home and their families and everything. And I'd sit there and I'd think, that's not me. I never tried that. I never worked. I worked as a as a box boy in a market when I was 12 years old, 13 years old. Not long, because they locked me up right away. And I worked selling newspapers. And then I had to quit that job because their money started getting confused with mine. I wasn't very old, but I needed the money. We were going to have a party on a Friday night, and there was no booze. And that was the end of my working career until I was 35 years old. So I didn't have that, other than one or two efforts during the parole. And I'd hear the stories, and I couldn't identify. I understand alcoholic. Now look at that second step. Whew. Insanity. Be restored to sanity. I thought, Lord, they ain't going to accomplish that. They ain't going to accomplish that. Because when you take a boy like me that's scared to death and you lock him up in those cells with them, where there's some mean dudes. They're real mean, and you got to make a decision. Or at least I had to. I had to make a decision. I either going to walk funny or walk real straight. And I learned to walk. I could walk completely across the football field, and the cheek would never wiggle. Those are important things. And you learn that when you're the new man in the block and somebody pats you on the butt, you got to hit them. It don't matter. It don't matter how big they are, how much you know you're going to get whipped. You got to hit them. And God Almighty, it took all the courage in the world. I guess in my own way, I was courageous because I'd hit people that I was absolutely mortified, scared to death of, just scared to death of. And when the alcohol was there, the fear was gone. I had no fear. I'd sit around that lucky spot and the blackboard and anywhere, all the good homes. Hey, I love country music. I love a lot of smoke and loud music. And I love to watch you guys fight. I really got an excitement out of that. But I didn't like my turn. I never did like my turn. And so I managed to put it off by running with people who were mean, and I'd keep them supplied. And at 16 years of age, I took up an occupation that was doomed. I decided to become an armed robber. And I'm basically a people pleaser. I want everybody in the world to like me, and you ain't going to combine the two of them and make it work. They just ain't too many people pleasing armed robbers that are successful. And I ended up in a reform school. It was a little bit worse than the others, and I come out of there, and I knew by then that I'd already invested several years of my life, and I kind of wanted to straighten up. If they'd just kind of give me a break when I got out this time, it would be different. I'd be all right, and I'd hit that street, and that feeling of fear would overcome me, and that insecurity, and all that awareness that I'm different than anybody else. And I also knew I was a little crazy by now, because I'd gotten in situations in there where I had to react in a crazy manner, insanity, in order to survive, and survive under the principles that those boys in there live by, the ones who didn't turn stoolies and all that stuff. So I had some hard principles I was trying to live by. And I became a little more bitter and a little more angry and a little more violent. And I got out of there knowing that this time it was going to be all right. It was going to be different. They let me off on California Avenue, California in 99 at that time. And I was supposed to catch the bus and go on over into Oildale where I was living. supposed to go move in with my mom and had a job waiting for me. And when I got off that bus, I looked up and down that street, and I said, no, there's no sense in it. There ain't no sense in it. I'm wasting my time. And I called a friend of mine whose phone number I had, and he said, oh, dude, when'd you get out? And I said, just did. He said, let's go celebrate. And I said, let's go. And 70-some-odd days later, I was laying in jail. I'll give you that and tell you that that repeated itself 2 more times. And each time was good for about 2 months. And each time I'd be back doing another year, and each time was always the same dream and the same BS. And the only thing that helped me with any peace of mind or any comfort within me at all was when I was drinking. Because when I was drinking, I was happy. And I wasn't violent, and I wasn't trying to hurt anybody, and I wasn't even defending. It wasn't even important. You know, if you want to whip on me, fine. You know, we'll go a few rounds. It don't hurt when you're drunk. Hurts the next day, but you don't talk about it. And at 20 years of age, they sent me in. And I was in 2.5 years, and I came out, and I was out 2 months, and I went back for 3 years, and I came out, and I was out, about 9 months altogether. When I drank at this time, I drank because it was necessary. Not because I was having DTs, not because I was shaking. It was necessary because everything around me was like a finger on a sore spot, like salt being poured on there. Just everything around me was just, and all I wanted was to hang on. If I could just hang on and get that parole done and get the hell out of California, I'd be all right. I got so much of my life already blown away in prisons and institutions. I just want to get off that parole and get out of California. But I couldn't be around them people without alcohol. And at the end of that 6 months or whatever period of time it was, I found myself going back to prison. And I found myself using chemicals in prison that weren't really meant to be used. I had to smile a while ago. I'm engaged to a non-alcoholic. She has another disease I like to refer to as Catholicism. She was looking at your little poster there, and she kind of laughed. She said, that's funny. She said, he doesn't even have a choice. And I said, if there's a coconut in that tree, he's got a choice. You make alcohol out of it. You can make alcohol out of anything that'll rot. Hey, you think about that a minute. It's all it takes, right? Just takes a little rot. When I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, I did 7 years and 3 months because I got arrested while I was in prison. That's always kind of awkward. And I got arrested for buying alcohol. They charged me with escape and sent me to Folsom. And I was to go on and finish up another 5 years. I had 2 at that time. And when I came out of there, I was absolutely convinced I couldn't live in prison anymore. I didn't know how I was going to live out here. I had no idea, but I was convinced I couldn't live in prison anymore. And I'd done some bad things. I'd done some violent things, and there was an amends that could never be made, a life that was lost during one of the crimes. And nobody knew this stuff. There wasn't anybody knowing about it. And I'm walking around not ever wanting to go back and not knowing how I'm going to live here. And I had a job that was gotten to me by the damned old robbery policeman that sent me to prison. So I can't walk around and say nobody ever tried to help me. You know, even the cop that sent me up had a job for me when I got out, and unsolicited by me because I didn't talk to cops. I walked in and I did my time, and I paid my price, and I made you think that it wasn't important any other way. I made you think that I was remorseful, and I wasn't. All I was aware that I couldn't live normal life. And without alcohol, without some kind of chemical, I don't stand a chance. But I tried, and I lasted 60 days. The end of I lasted 60 altogether. I lasted about 3 weeks. And I sat down in a bar, and I had myself a double shot of vodka and a 7-back, and it was out in a little town called Pumpkin Center. Yeah, lovely town. Lovely town. And a fella named Bill W. out there. And it wasn't Wilson. But They like to honky tonk out there. They like to get it on. They guaranteed a fight in the parking lot every night. And them fools that get up and talk about, God damn, boy, he really hit me. Wasn't that good? No. No, that's why I carry the gun all the time. I'm too skinny to get hit. It hurts me more than it does the guys with a little weight on them. God, it was just an absolute. I had no more of a decision making on that business of having that drink that day than I ever had on any drink I ever took. And when I had it, it worked instantly. Instantly. I just glowed inside, and I sat there on that stool, and I got confidence. And I went back to that job the next day that they had gotten me, and driving a forklift in a peach packing shed. And that afternoon, this old truck driver came in, and I'd tell him the hours I'd been working, and he handed me some little white pills. And I took them little old white pills, and I got too nervous, because they'll make you get nervous. And I got me some Jack Daniels, because Jack Daniels won't make you nervous. Smooths it out. And, by mid-evening, I'm working somewhere around my 16th hour of work. I did that for about 4 days. I'm giving them 18, 20 hours at a shot, talking 90 miles an hour, jaws cranking. Got a forklift with peaches stacked up to here, and I'm making turns and hitting that refrigerator, and the thing is whooping in circles, and peach boxes is flying everywhere. Well, there ain't nothing you can do with a job like that except walk off of it. I didn't have any choice. My career as a truck driver was over. And I was suspended when my parole officer seen me, he said I looked like a senior citizen hippie. I didn't know what he meant exactly, because I felt quite normal. I was very fast. I was sleeping about 10 minutes every day or so. And we were eating onion and mayonnaise sandwiches and raw big rolls of bologna. And we had Jack Daniels and Canadian Club and them little white pills. Now, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I was trying to find that identification with those speakers, and they're talking about having acquired things and then drank until they lost it, and they lost family, and they lost jobs, and they lost homes, and I'm sitting there trying to think, I don't understand. I can't put a relationship. I can't seem to identify with that, because all I've ever been all my life is a thief. All I ever done all my life is time. All I've known. I've 21 out of 26 years locked up inside. I just don't know anything else. I don't put this together. And then I begin to listen. And I begin to hear fear. Oh, God, they talk about that awful easily up here. Maybe it's not the kind of fear that I knew. And then I'd hear military men get up and talk about the fear they had during their escapades of war or whatever else was going on. And I think, well, I can't deny that. That's my fear. And then I think about, when I was a kid, I was a hell of a burglar. I mean, I always got caught. You know, when an armed robber in your own hometown without a mask, you're going to get caught. You just, no, there ain't going to be much success. As a forger and a drinking forger, I made mistakes. I'd pick names like Kalanovich. And my education was paid for by a carton of cigarettes in one of the prisons. I bought a high school diploma, so I don't have much. And but I learned to spell Kalanovich, and it would come out right until right around 1:30 in the morning. You know, then it fell off the paper, and just and then people got, you know, and you can only go in a small town. You can only cash so many checks in so many stores, and then they want identification, because I still had that kind of baby face about me. And I'd walk in there and put a hard hat on, some leather boots and a leather jacket, and get somebody else's clothes out of a doghouse. And I know there's some oil field workers around here, and I'm making my amends to you right now. I was one of those crapheads that used to come into the doghouse, and I probably wouldn't even take a wallet. I just wanted the clothes. And I'd cash them checks, and then it would end up with, they'd refuse to give it to me without ID, and so I'd get mad and go get a book of checks and write my own name on it, because I had my own ID. And you don't last long that way. Alcoholic thinking, I guess. But I was very good as a burglar. And my last burglary during that 7 or 8 days of Jack Daniels, vodka, and Benny's, I was to make up my mind that I was going to go burglarize the place because we were out of money, and I had a resentment of the young girl who went with my buddy, and I thought it was love. And she walked into the other room, and love ended. Didn't take me long to lose them. I don't know why they were that way. And there's one way to always control a woman. If you put enough fear in them, by God, they'll listen to you. At least while you're right there. At least while you're right there. And then, of course, you don't want to go to sleep. Give them about 48 hours before you go to sleep, especially in Bakersville. You'll find yourself tied down in bed and getting hurt real bad. And mean women up there. Never break up a fight in a country bar between a man and a woman, especially if it's a man and a wife, because she'll knock your head in quicker than he will. That's their own fight, and they want it to themselves, and they don't share it. I went out to do this burglary, and I'm very fast now because the Benny's is working. I knew in prison I'd learned, the best way to do a burglary is through the roof. It didn't matter that it was a beer bar. And I got lost in the attic. Got from the rooftop into the attic, and I couldn't get out, couldn't get in. I got Benzedrine, has got everything in the world. Bakersfield is known for bugs and spiders, and I'm scared to death of both. And I got in there in that attic, and it was dark, and I couldn't find the hole I came in through, and all of a sudden my hair started crawling, because Benny's will do that anyway. And I just knew spiders was on me, and God, I found a duck like that, and I literally just kicked it out of the damn seat, and I looked down, and there's a naked light bulb burning there, and it was a toilet. And I looked down there, and the light was on so I could see, and I was so relieved to see that room. I knew I was going to die in there, and there'd be everybody in prison would be laughing about how old Newt got out. And they found him starved to death in an attic, But I just had these terrible pictures going, and I looked down there, and I'm nearly 6 foot, and I figured if I hold on to the edge of that ceiling, I can step down on that light bulb and then reach that sink down below it. And they don't make light bulbs that strong. I went through that light bulb, just right straight to that sink, and I caught the bulb and ripped this hand all open here, and I hit the sink, and it broke off the wall. My butt hit the floor, my head hit the wall behind me. For a second I was out, and when I got my eyes open, I got blood pumping here, and I got a hot water line that's busted, and it's pumping hot water at me like that, and I'm sitting there saying, God. That was my praying moments. That was more spiritual part of my life. God. Was not what I intended to do. No. Obviously, alcohol is interfering with what I do for a living. My last armed robbery. I had to find these identifications because my first armed robberies were slick. I was fast and good. Boy, get in and out of there quick. But movie theaters and liquor stores and markets, and get that money and be gone. Wouldn't cover ourselves up, but nobody really cared. We weren't really caring because we didn't care. What's the use? We went at it. We didn't care. And my last armed robbery, I had the gun stuck in the front of my pants. Hell, he couldn't have hit it if it wanted to. That was other problems that you was to help me with later years. Went in there and tried to get your hands up through Benzedrine, Jack Daniels, and Canadian Club, and I guess it was understood. The only thing is I'm trying to jerk a gun out, and the spur's caught in the buttonhole. The hammer's caught in there, and I'm jerking, and I ripped my shirt off. I'm looking at this damn fool, and I just finally say, oh, screw it, and I turn around and walk out. I didn't even, 21 years invested into my education, and it was no longer applicable to my way of life. Alcohol was obviously interfering with what I did for a living, And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I heard the stories, and I'd sit there, and I'd listen because, I got married one time. I got out of prison, met a woman that had 3 kids. She was a barmaid, and she had 3 kids, and that was when I was out about, I guess, 9 months altogether. And I was very violent in that home because I didn't know how to control anybody. The only way I know how to get somebody to scare me off my back is to put fear in them. And I'd do that in that house. And those kids would come in and holler, and I'd beat them, and that woman would be crying at me when I'd be coming home from the Lucky Spot. It'd be 2 in the morning, and she'd be screaming at me, "Where you been?" You know, and all I know, I just get this horrible feeling on me, and then I just hit it. Just hit it. I'd hit anything to come around me and hit the walls. It didn't make any difference, you know, and just absolutely crazy. People would tell me they wasn't going to give me their money, and I'd put pistols in their mouths and jack the hammers back, and I'm just crazier than a damn loon. And I'd look at that step up there, and I'd say, I don't know what you're talking about, restore me to sanity. I don't know how to live around normal people. I just don't know how to do it. I do not know how to do it. They scare me, and I've never been able to tell them that. I don't even tell myself that. I had to hear it from people in these meetings, and they begin to talk about their fears openly. And they talk about how their children scared them, and I never thought about it. I never knew that that was fear. When those children would come out screaming and crying. I have the same reaction today. I had the same reaction today. I just act differently on it. You know. We stopped at the split pea place. And I told her the money's a little short, honey, so we're going to have to just go in and look. Only I told her that yesterday. And when we walked in there, she seen something pretty. And my immediate reaction was anger. I'm 14 years, 7 months, and 3 weeks sober. My immediate reaction was anger. And I expressed it quietly. I mumbled something profane, not profound. And I said, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I started walking to the door. And she followed me to the car. And I finally got out an obscenity and a shut up. And she did her number. She got in the car and sat down and went about her business. She didn't feed it. She didn't fight it. Because that's the grace period that she gives me now after we've been around each other for 10 years. She gives me that grace period because she knows. You know, I have a few moments when I'm in that state where I have to get a chance. I got to recoup. I got to kind of put things together. Doesn't matter how long I've been sober. Maybe it does. Maybe you expect more out of that. I don't know. That's me. That's what I am today. And as we're driving down the road to get on down to here, I kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking, the only reason I'm really angry is because she wanted something that I can't give to her, and it made me feel bad. And when those children in that marriage wanted something I couldn't give to them, like shoes or clothing, it made me feel bad, and so I'd whip them. And they wouldn't ask. And I'd whip that woman, and she wouldn't talk. And in this case, about 10 miles down the road, I smoke. I'm not doing it tonight for the courtesy of Al. He thinks I can't go an hour. And I took my cigarette and I went over and I very lightly flipped an ash on her leg. And she slapped the ash off. And then I drove a little further and I nudged her like that. And she says, "Your mama." Good Catholic girl. Taught her everything she knows. That was a fight. Wasn't it? That was a fight. I love her dearly. I love her dearly. That was a fight, and when I walked in, fights were violent. And sat in these meetings, got drunk and sober, drunk and sober, drunk and sober for 2 years. Met Al in 71. I'd been around this particular group. I was around already, been there since 70, and I couldn't stay sober. I'd stay sober a little while and couldn't get sober because I kept denying the disease. I kept denying that it was alcoholism. I kept trying to find that crappy stuff in them steps that's going to. I don't talk about God because I got a life that's lost, and He knows it. And so I was raised in a Baptist church when I was a kid, and I know that that's one of the big ones that don't ever get cleaned up. The slate never gets cleaned, so I'm dead and stinking anyway. And I got all these secrets. I got tons and tons of secrets. I got little petty secrets. I was a farm boy and lived around animals out there as a young kid, and picked up a lot of guilt, you know, and that's as close as we're going to get to that crap. And but I got all these little secrets I'm hanging on to, and I get in these meetings, and there's pretty people in there, and there's people dressed well, and I don't, you know, I dress state clothing. I come out and dress state clothing. The reason I got this thing tonight, and the reason I got all this is because I enjoy wearing it today. But 14 years ago, my sponsor at that time told me to wear a tie at the podium when I knew in advance that I was going to be there for a commitment. And then I think he was joking. He may not have been. He just said that what you got to say may not do much. But there may be somebody up there that likes your tie, and so they'll come back to one more meeting and see if they can get one like it. Real encouraging man. Real encouraging. I got back to Alcoholics Anonymous because I did something I'd never done in my life. I took 2 months of my life trying to quit drinking. Really tried to quit drinking. Every damn day I promised myself, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go get a job. I'd promised this woman that had left AA with me, and everything's going to get better. I'm going to straighten it up. What is it? Anybody owning a blue Mazda that might be parked a little bit in a driveway? I think you're almost taken care of. Thank you. But I didn't say it, so it doesn't count. I got back because I tried to quit drinking. I'd never done that. I'd never tried to quit drinking. I'd drink rubbing alcohol in prison, aftershave lotions. I'd drink anything there was. I'd use anything there was. I'd drop any pill there was. Take your nail, scratch the pill, taste it. If it's bitter, it's supposed to do something. Do it. Didn't matter what it was. I never always knew what it was. Just do something. Just get me out of where I was. And I never really had a problem with alcohol as far as the blackouts and things until after I come to this damn program. Hey, if you're new here tonight, and I'm going to tell you, you've stayed too long already. You'll never drink comfortably again. Never. That's my experience. You've already heard too much. And I'd listen to them stories, and then I kept going back there, and, oh, God, we got to do an inventory. That means I got to set up on paper enough evidence to put me away for the rest of my natural life. That's all I could see when they were talking about that. And I got to tell about those degrading things. And I got to tell about all those, you know, I never played any of those funny games in prison. I just depended on my own creations. And they'll leave you guilty, I'll tell you. Thought all this abnormalness. I thought all this was unique. I thought people who went to prisons and lived like animals were like this. And then I told an inventory to a ex-49er football player who had never really been in prison, and he stopped me about every 3 sentences. I mean, and the more dirty stuff. And he was, you know, thank God, he was a dirty old man. And he would share with me something relative to what I just read to him. And the crimes was something else. That was a different ballpark. If your story is like mine and you're sitting out there thinking, oh boy, I got to go make amends for all those robberies and the killings and all that stuff, I'm going to tell you exactly what I did with that. I went to a fellow named Chuck C. Had been sober a number of years. And I sat down with Chuck up there at his home, and I said, this is what I've done. And I read it off to him. And it was heavy and it was long. And he said, the day you walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and as long as you don't take another drink and you're a member in good standing in this program, you have already paid in full for everything you've done. I thought, whew, best judge I ever been in front of. And then he says, but if it ever comes to you, you have to be willing to face it and go through it. You have to be willing to walk through it. And I thought, that's horrendous. I don't know that I can do that. I don't know if somebody runs up to me and says, all right, we got evidence here in 19 da-da-da-da-da-da that you were here, and we want to try you for that. I don't know if I've got it in me to hold still and go through that. I'd like to think I have, and so I call it willingness. I am willing to, and in 14 years, 7 months, nobody's tested me on it. I hope they never do. I really hope they never do. And then I begin to watch other people, and I watch people deal with some terrible, terrible tragedies. I watched them deal with tragedies that I thought to myself, I could not do that. I don't know how you do that. And you'd hear it all around you. Just get through today. Tomorrow's none of your business. You can't change yesterday. Do what you can to do what's in front of you. If you got to get it down to 10 minutes, do it the next 10 minutes. If you got to do it for 1 minute, do it for 1 minute. There ain't nothing that can't be taken care of in Alcoholics Anonymous if you don't take a drink or get loaded. It'll be this program and that big book and the people who have practiced it and are successfully sober at it, that's the evidence of practice, and happy. They can get you through any of it. And I began to watch them. My demons showed up. The first 5 years of my sobriety were violent years. Periodically, about every 3 months or so, I just would have an explosion. I was to get married in the program. I was to meet one of those girls you said not to mess with. I wondered why. I found out. At 5 years of sobriety, I lost my right to control another human being physically. I lost that right because I had been overexcited the night before and had taken a hold of my daughter, and instead of beating her with what I felt like I wanted to do, I walked her into a bedroom and I sit her on her bed, and I went back out and I made that stupid phone call. You had me in the conditions. They brainwashed me where I was at, thank God. They told me I never had to make a decision. Be there, be there, be there, say yes, say yes, say yes. Somebody wants to move, help them. They want to ride home, help them. Set up chairs, clean them up afterwards, wash coffee cup, all physical action. Nobody ever taxed my brain in the beginning. Nobody ever taxed it. Just be physically active. Fortunately enough, it keeps you so damn busy, you really don't have time for much else. And so it was to hold me in good stead. God has a sense of humor. He likes to test people who are nuts. I found out what that second step's all about. I'm going to run over a little bit, and I'll have to ask your forgiveness. I just would like to tell you a couple of things. Because if sobriety wasn't better than when I was drinking, I will guarantee you I would not be here tonight. I'll guarantee you. And if I had looked at what I was going to have to go through in the next 14 years in advance, I would not be here tonight because I'd have never believed I could deal with it. I always had answers for everything that came into my life, and they were always the wrong answers. And AA taught me how to deal with them. Very slow, very slow. Taught me how to be nonviolent. Taught me how to fight, just like I did tonight. That is not my fight. I have an ex-wife up in Bakersfield or somewhere who I held a butcher knife into her belly one night because she asked me where I had been. And I told her to shut up, and she didn't shut up. And I held her on her tiptoes, and I had that knife up there in her belly, and she kept looking at me and saying, go ahead, kill me, kill me. And then she realized I wasn't going to move the knife, and she started pleading with me, and I held it there until her own body weight put it in her. And her son come out of there screaming, don't kill my mama, and I threw the knife at him. It went into a cabinet, and I threw him across the room. I slapped the little one back in her bedroom as I went out the door, and I jumped in my car, and I went over in back of the lucky spot, closed, and had myself a drink out of the glove compartment, and everything was all right. That's my arguments. That's the only way I knew how to argue when I got here. Filled with fear. I never knew that my anger and my hostility was in equal proportion to how afraid I was at any given moment. I didn't know that women scared me. I didn't know that children scared me or hurt me emotionally by the fear of what I couldn't give them, what I couldn't do. I quit putting conditions on myself. I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous that a male is entitled to have a headache once in a while. You know, it's a very important ingredient in sobriety. I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous how to measure, and everything was equal. And I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous that God is a very forgiving God. I don't care what anybody else says today. All that crap, all that unforgivable stuff that can't ever be wiped from the slate is gone. And the reason being is because I'm filled with secrets today. I am filled with secrets. I stand at these podiums willingly most of the time, and I tell this little pieces of garbage that was part of my life, and somebody comes up to me later, or they hear about it and they come to me and they tell me about some terrible, degrading, degenerate type of thing that they did, and that they can't stay sober with it in their mind. And I take it from them, and I give them mine. And I tell them about the children, or I tell them about the deaths, or I tell them about the crimes, and I exchange with them. So I'm filled with secrets today, and they're all yours. Ain't none of them mine. I don't have none of mine anymore. I really don't. I have the ability today to walk up to my sponsor, and when he's my ex-sponsor, Keith, he comes in from New York. He's a big old burly man, and I walk up to him and I give him a big hug, and he kisses me on my cheek. And I don't look around to see if anybody's looking. I ain't worried that he's trying to get me after all those years of defending that. My daughter is 13 years old. She's the result of that marriage that you told me not to get involved in, that relationship. And I'm grateful for that child today. It was a wonderful thing. If you're new here tonight and you was to ask me my opinion on those type of things, and you haven't, so I'm going to give it to you, I would refrain from getting myself emotionally involved with anything for at least 6 or 8 months of sobriety, because it's such a distraction from the core of what this program has to... You know, the program has to work so fast. I think there's just a minute moment where our attention has gotten long enough to walk in and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic." I didn't believe I was alcoholic until I got the full year in, where I was really convinced 100% I am an alcoholic who cannot drink, smoke, drop, or do anything. I can't do anything chemically without it breaking me out into a drunk. I'm that kind of an alcoholic. And it took me most of the first year. That insanity up there has to deal with drinking some rubbing alcohol. I drank a quart of rubbing alcohol in the penitentiary. I had 6 years in. It was all the booze I had around me, so I drank it. I got deathly sick. I puked up my blood. I puked up my guts. Took me about 4 days to get recuperated from that. About a month later, I was making some homemade wine that turned to vinegar. I went back to the photo lab, got another quart of rubbing alcohol, and figured out that if I added more water and more orange juice, that it probably wouldn't make me sick. And that's the insanity that I think the step 2 is referring to. That we could kill ourselves nearly with alcohol and then become physically well again and decide that once again we can drink. It's an act of insanity. It really is. And yet everyone, I myself, and those I have watched with many more years sobriety than me, who get complacent and reach a point in their life where this thing is a pain, it's a bore, it's asking a little too much to have to go here or do this or take... Why should I have to take some new fellow home? I've been sober 14 years. Let that newcomer. I got asked to speak at a panel the other night in my home group, which is so sponsor-orientated, so gung-ho on activity and action. And the guy says, "Do you speak at panels?" And I said, "I speak wherever I'm asked." He said, "Well, the reason I ask you is because some of the old-timers here, they don't speak at panels anymore." I'm sorry if that takes place in your life. The reason I'm sorry is because every time I get involved in that type of a commitment, I come out of it washed once more. I don't feel pure every day. I got to re-clean myself regularly. See, this thing ain't stopped. I'm still an armed robber. When I see when I see an armored truck, oh, there is nearly a physical romance taking place. I still think that way. I've been with this woman for 9 years, and she's Catholic, and she was raised with her principles, and so she don't play a lot of the games that I want to play. Number one, she won't live with me, and I've tried hard to break that down. And the end result is I have recognized the fact that every time I controlled any relationship, whether it be with a friend, another man or woman, didn't matter. Every time I controlled it, I screwed it up. And so I waved my white flag. I said, "All right, God, you want to be cute? I went all those years in the penitentiary with a pair of socks. I can stand it out here a little longer." And he sent me this nut. And it took us until 2 days before Christmas to get a letter from her church, and the church annulled my previous marriages. This is part of the routine of what they deal with. I don't have any need for that, but she does. It's her principles. She taught me that normies are entitled to principles. I didn't know that. The book keeps referring to practicing these principles in all my affairs. That means that when I go out there on the street and one of them normies comes up and he offends me, I don't kill him. I don't take a pipe, but I'll tell you something. Every time I don't kill him, I've made amends to the people that I have hurt that I can't make amends to. The program's got every darn thing that I could name to you in 4 hours has given me an answer for it. And it's given me a God that I love today. And it's given me a God who does not speak to me. He really don't. And it gives me a God that, I hear people say you got to keep them prayers simple. That's fine, but if you don't ask the dude for extra, how's he going to know you want it? That's my logic. So instead of getting the same prayer done that you might do in 30 seconds, I got to spend 2 or 3 minutes yakking with him because I got all these requests. I'm afraid if I don't ask him, he may not give it to me. And I want to be a millionaire. I'd like to at least one time. One time. In the meantime, I'll continue to work. I learned to love men in Alcoholics Anonymous by a growing relationship with a man named Ramon, and then I'll get down from here because I know I'm abusing you. Ramon was an old wino off of Texas, and he dealt drugs out of a shoe shine box when he was 9 years old in El Paso, and he was just a piece of crud. And he come to this program off of Skid Row as a wino like none I've ever known. And he was violent, and he was mean, and he had hurt many people in his lifetime. And he was a hobo and a wino. He dropped drugs and just got to pure wine. And Ramon became one of the more spiritual men in our group, a very quiet one that most people didn't know except when he was talking to him. And Ramon taught me how to love all members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He taught me how to love old-timers who offended me regularly. They did. They just, because they'd look you in the eyes and say, "How are you?" and wait for answers. And he taught me the secret of loving them, and the secret of loving them or any other person, any other alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous is to not wish them drunk. I don't have to like them. I don't have to worry about their personalities. I don't care whether ours match or not. I don't fit every ranch where I come from. I tend to be a little crude. I try not to be from here. He taught me how to love to the point that when I walked up into his bed and he was dying of cancer, and he was about 2 or 3 days from being dead, and I didn't know it. When I looked down at him, I just had a funny feeling, and I reached over and I kissed him on his forehead, and I said, "I love you, Vato." And he says, "I love you too." And that kind of love was able to give me this love, was able to give me the love of my daughter, the love of my son, even though he's up there humiliating me before everybody. I'm glad to be here tonight, and I hope if my story is not relative to your experiences, I hope you'll know one thing, and I give it to you as a gospel truth, if that helps you any. I have not had a drink or taken any chemicals that affect me from the neck up for 14 years and 7 months. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is the only thing that's done that. I could have gave you that message from the beginning, and we could have been out of here almost an hour ago, but I have an ego, and I want to keep remembering where I came from. Thank you very much.